everyone, let's continue our discussion with the second macromolecules inside our body, which is lipids. So before anything else, let's know first the learning objectives of this lesson. So first is to define and explain the process of lipids. Second is to distinguish the different kinds of lipids and its function. Third, identify the several major functions of lipids. So now let's start with the introductory part of the lesson. It said that the word lipids is derived from a Greek word lipos, which means fat. Actually, lipids include a diverse group of compounds that are largely non-polar in nature. It is non-polar because the chain of the lipids is actually involve hydrocarbons. When we say hydrocarbons, a single carbon is attached to another carbon, or a carbon is attached to an hydrogen bond. So that is why lipids is called is attached, or it's called as a non-polar in nature. Aside from that, it said that biologically, lipids are chemically diverse group of organic compounds which are insoluble in water. When we say insoluble in water, this is the reason why in the bonding process of the substance in water, the substance is more stronger than the water. So that is basically said that lipids is actually insoluble in water, because sometimes, like for example, example of lipids, let's say oil. When you mix an oil into a water, it is insoluble. Why? Because the substance, which is lipids, is much more stronger than the water. Okay, but actually lipids also can be soluble. When we say soluble in non-polar solvents. So question: why are lipids soluble in non-polar solvents? Because of the electrons that form in the band. It is actually shared unequally between the atoms, because oxygen atoms have a stronger pull on electrons than hydrogen does. So that is why lipids cannot dissolve in polar solvent. They can dissolve in non-polar solvent. That is actually said that lipids is soluble in non-polar solvent. Again, why are lipids soluble in non-polar solvent? Because of lipids cannot dissolve in polar solvent, but they can dissolve in non-polar solvent because of the distribution of electrons. Because the distribution of electrons is unequal. That is why lipids can be soluble but in non-polar solvent, but it is insoluble in water. Take note with that. Aside from that, these are the compounds that actually a non-polar solvent, like ether, chloroform, and benzene. Actually, when lipids mix to this compound, it can bring a result with a soluble in non-polar solvent. But if the lipids will mix into water, it is insoluble. You cannot mix it. You can basically see the differences between the water and the lipids, or the substance itself. Okay, it said also this one, that lipids are hydrophobic in nature due to predominance of hydrocarbon chains. That is why I've said a while ago, when we say a hydrocarbon, it is actually a single carbon is attached to another carbon, or a single carbon is attached to a hydrogen bond. When we say hydrophobic, we know that hydrophobic means the fear of water. Yes. Why? Because it said that lipids is non-polar. So when we say non-polar, it is hydrophobic, or fear of water. The molecules and the surfaces repel water. So hydrophobic liquids such as oil, that is why it's called hydrophobic, because one of an hydrophobic liquids is oil. Oil will always separate from water. Okay, take note with that. Another, it said that unlike the protein, nucleic acid and polysaccharide, lipids are not polymer. What do you mean by polymer? Okay, when we say polymer, it is actually the substance or material that is consisting of a large molecules or macromolecules composed of many repeating subunits. This is actually pertaining to the chemical structure of the lipids. Yes, aside from the protein, nucleic, and polysaccharide, which is, as we all know, polysaccharide contain a lot of sugar, but lipids is not included with the polymer because lipids has no, or the consisting of the large molecules of it is quite too small, so that is why it is not polymer. Second one, it said that they are the chief storage form of energy. They provide sixfold as much energy as equivalent mass of glycogen. Yes, of course, aside from carbohydrates, which is actually the source of energy, lipids itself also can give, or also the storage of energy. So it mentioned the word glycogen, or the term glycogen. What do you mean by this term? I've already mentioned it. When we say glycogen, it is actually a multi-branch polysaccharide of glucose that serves as a form of energy storage in a certain organism. Yes, that is why it is a chief storage form of energy, because glycogen is actually involved with the process or the structure of the lipids. Next is, it said that the fats and oils are the principal stored form of energy in many organisms. Yes, it said, because fat molecule consists of two components, and it actually called as a glycerol and fatty acids. Later part we will also discuss that one. So that is why fat and oils are the principal stored form of energy in many organisms. Okay, it said also that lipids participate in oxidative phosphorylation. Okay, this term. So what do you mean by this term? Oxidative phosphorylation. This is actually, we can actually saw this one in the process of lipids. So when we say oxidative phosphorylation, it is actually the process in which ATP, which is adenosine triphosphate, is formed as a result to the transfer of electrons from NADH. Aside from that, it said that lipids has its neutral lipids. This neutral lipids is actually defined as a hydrophobic molecules. When we say hydrophobic molecules, again, it is fear of water. This is actually a molecules and a surfaces which repel when you put it in water. So it is called hydrophobic molecules. Again, when we say neutral lipids, it is actually defined as a hydrophobic molecules with lacking charge group. One of the example of neutral lipids is triglycerol. Okay, it said that upon hydrolysis it yield glycerol and fatty acid. Yes, when a triglyceride, or also known as triglycerols, will actually undergo with the process of hydrolysis or splitting of water, the more you will put the triglycerol in the water, it will become, or it yields with another substance which is called glycerol and fatty acid. Later on, we will dig deep with that terminology, which is glycerol and fatty acid. And I've said a while ago that the two components of a fat is glycerol and fatty acid. Okay, next to that is, it said many lipids molecule are amphiphatic. What do you mean by amphiphatic? Okay, amphiphatic is actually the word used to describe a chemical compound containing both polar or soluble in water and non-polar, or which is actually not soluble in water. yes, in our in our yes, I also mentioned kanina that lipids is insoluble in water but soluble in non-polar solvent. So that makes it amphiphatic. Again, when we say amphiphatic, it is a word used to describe a chemical compound containing both polar, which is water, which is the water is soluble, and non-polar, which is not water soluble. Okay, another. It actually said that in aqueous environment, lipid molecules associate by non-covalent interaction to form supramolecular structures such as monolayers, micelles, bilayers, and vesicles.